Today we're continuing in our sermon series on the path to the empty tomb. I hope you've enjoyed this series. I have, because it's helped me to think about Lent as a season of spiritual and personal renewal, and to consider each aspect of my life and how I am living either in tune or out of tune with God. Today we're almost halfway through the season of Lent, almost halfway through this understanding of God's path before us as the path to the empty tomb. And today we're going to talk about what I've already mentioned to the children up here, that God gives us a second chance, an opportunity to wipe the slate clean. When you came in to worship, a few people were brave enough to write a few words on the dry erase boards outside. I saw self-worth, insecurity, depression. I'm sure that as you walked by, you thought in your own head what might have been written on that board. Some of the things that you have done or not done, those things that you struggle with that are hard or difficult to put down and out of thought. This is what's going on, I believe, in the life of the Christians in Ephesus. That they are, even though they are Christians, struggling with those areas in which their life does not always match up to God's expectations for them. So we're going to turn in your bulletin or in your pew Bible, or if you have a smartphone or other device, we're going to turn to Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Paul is writing to this church in Ephesus and helping them understand their new life and new opportunity, the clean slate that they are living in. I invite you to hear these words. You were dead through the trespasses and sins in which you once lived, following the course of the world, following the ruler of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work among those who are disobedient. All of us once lived among them in the passions of our flesh, following the desires of flesh and senses, and we were by nature children of wrath, like everyone else. But God, who is rich in mercy, out of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead through our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the ages to come he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness towards us in Christ Jesus. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not the result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are what he has made us, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand to be our way of life. This is the word of God for us, the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. Paul, in this text, starts talking about the ways in which our lives are headed. He talks about the direction of our lives. And you'll notice that he talks about following several times in this scripture. What are you following? In which path are you walking? And who are you following in that direction? He says that they were following the course of this world. They were following the ruler of the power of the air. They were going in the wrong direction. They were following the way that everyone else was doing and where they were going. They were headed in this wrong direction. Some of them knew it. Some of them had no clue that they were going in the wrong direction. And Paul says, helping them look back at that old life, that it was a path to meaninglessness and incompleteness. He even starts off the whole sentence by saying, you are dead in this old life. Even though some of them probably at that time did not feel dead, but felt just as alive as everyone else. And that phrase at the very end of the first paragraph of Ephesians 2 stands out to me. Paul's talking about all the people and which direction they're going, what they're doing, and at the end he says, like everyone else. Like everyone else. Have you noticed sometimes that you end up living your life just like everyone else? We pattern our lives and what we wear sometimes after the example of others around us. Sometimes even our preferences are dictated by those around us. And part of that is human nature because we want to live in harmony with other people. And yet sometimes we blindly do so, becoming like everyone else without thinking about the consequences or thinking about what that means for us and for others. While seeking to be in harmony with others is a good and wonderful thing, doing so and going in the wrong direction leads to what Paul is describing here, going in the wrong direction, following the course of this world, finding ourselves dead in our trespasses. See, life was very different for the Christians in Ephesus before they began following in the footsteps of Jesus. Some of them probably were doing these horrible, terrible things that we understand as sin. Some of them were saved from that terrible direction by the evangelists like Paul, who came and shared with them this new information about a Messiah from Israel who died and was raised from the dead. And that in following him, they could have this clean slate and start anew. And we know that some of them did join up with Paul and others as they started these churches all around the Mediterranean, including in Ephesus. But some of the people who ended up becoming part of the church were not people that you would at that time have looked at as people who were evil or sinful, maybe with a capital S. They were, as Paul writes in Ephesians, like everyone else. They were good people. They did their work. They worshiped their gods. And they did whatever was expected of them by their culture. They got up in the morning, they did whatever it was that was normal, and went to bed at night. Now, around the culture at that time, you may not have assumed that they were living in sin because they were like everyone else. See, sin for us, and probably even back then, are those big and terrible, awful things that we do to harm one another. And now we know that also harms our relationship with God. While that first group who knew that they were doing wrong and terrible things, they came into the faith and began walking in the footsteps of Christ, they gave up these sins. This second group becomes part of the church, even though they were just getting by in life. Essentially, spending their time living for themselves, making sure that they were going to make it day to day to day, like everyone else. You've heard it before. You've probably even said it before. Everyone else was doing it. Everyone else was cheating on their taxes. Everyone else was going to the party. Everyone else was doing it. And what do we hear? And what do we say back to that? If everybody else was going to jump off a cliff, would you do it? Isn't it funny that we, even today, face the same types of pressures around our lives? Everyone else is doing it, and so maybe that's okay. Everyone else is doing it, so maybe I can get by. Everyone else is doing this. It's not as bad as that, and so I will continue on very happily. Going around our lives like this, with everyone else is doing it, or fitting in with everyone else, is not really a grace-filled life. We might find harmony with one another temporarily, or for a while, but are we finding a good life when we do that? We might temporarily find a friend, but are we going to find a friend who makes us better and helps us follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ? And everyone else is doing it life, unless you're in the right company, might be a life that leads to this meaninglessness and incompleteness that Paul explains in the very opening of Ephesians chapter 2. I often talk to people who say at the end of their lives, at the end of retirement, they were so busy trying to do what everyone else was doing that along the way they have all of these regrets. The moments that they had not taken advantage of, the people that they had not built relationships with, particularly their children or their spouses. Those lost opportunities to actually do and be a part of something that gives light and life and love through God to others. And all of those missed opportunities because we were oh so busy being like everyone else. Paul describes this sort of dead-end road of being like everyone else in the world, saying that this direction is not really going to help us become anything other than people living in harmony with others. But then he says, changing the subject to God, God who is rich in mercy came to you. God who is rich in mercy loved you, paid attention to you, accepted you, and called you to a better life. God shows up. God provides an opportunity for people who are terrible sinners to have a conversion and to be on a good and right path. And God shows up to these people who are just like everyone else and invites them to take a radically new direction in their life. Not just getting by, not just being in harmony with others, but giving their lives over to God so that they could be a blessing to others, to experience joy and peace and happiness that they could never have imagined just getting by in life. Paul adamantly declares that they found this new direction, this new life, because they encountered God's love and mercy. God's love and mercy changes the game. Once we experience God's love and mercy, it's not just about getting by or being like everyone else. It's about responding to God's goodness and mercy. It's about seeing ourselves as those who were loved by a God who didn't have to love us but chose to do so. And once we understand what that truly means, our lives become directed in new paths with new friendships, learning to give more freely to those in need. And the Bible is consistent about this, saying over and over again that we hear that God is abounding with steadfast love and forgiveness. See, it goes like this. People are living in the dark, so to speak, not understanding God's rich mercy and grace. And so God shows up through people like Paul and others who come and share this good news with them. They share that God loves and cares for them. And that God gives them an opportunity to wipe away all of those years of fitting in, or all of those years of doing those horrible things that have harmed others. God gives them an opportunity to start over with a clean slate, to give them a fresh start. And then God takes all of these people and binds them together into a church, giving them the power and the authority to continue to spread this goodness and mercy to all who enter through the doors. Even though all these folks around the city of Ephesus were on that dead-end road, even though they were floating through their lives just like everyone else, God provides them a new life. Whether they knew they needed a fresh start or they didn't, God gracefully came to each and every one of them. and offered to get rid of their old selves, their old life, and offer them a new one. Over and over again in the Bible, the word for God forgiving sins of others translates roughly into borne away or lifted off. When God forgives sins, there's action involved in it. When God forgives sins, it's not just saying, I forgive you. But there's a second step that occurs when God forgives us in which the sin is lifted off of us. As I mentioned to the children, there are texts saying that sin is at the bottom of the ocean. There are texts that say that God is removing our sin as far as the east is from the west. Forever. God has an action of lifting this sin and breaking its power in our lives so that we no longer have to give in to this never-ending cycle of being like everyone else. But sin can be lifted off and we can become freed with this clean slate and to go forward as new people, not bound by who we were defined as before, but freed to be who God needs us to be in the here and now. In the world, we can be labeled by one mistake. We can have these terrible experiences in our lives etched into our memory. But God has a way of taking all of those things and cleaning them off, lifting them off, and making them inconsequential. Surely you have known people who have gone through an experience in life where they were ready for a change, and God provided them that clean slate, and they were no longer defined by those historical issues, sins, mistakes. We as human beings might bring them up. We as human beings might not forget them or forgive them. But God, who is rich in mercy, does. God always offers us a chance to get back on the path, to return into his good graces. Because even if we leave the path, God is always there welcoming us back, like the good father in the parable of the prodigal son. No matter what we do, God can offer a clean slate. Friends, if you are at the point of your life where you need all of those things erased, God is willing and able and ready to give you that fresh start. Or if you're that person who's already gotten to the point in which you have offered your life to God and you've allowed God to erase all those things in your life, but yet you're holding on, it's time to learn to forgive yourself. Know that if God has already forgiven you, it's time for you to forgive yourself and to continue to walk in his direction. Because the path is ever before us. And God is wanting us to continue. Let us not be cemented to who we were or what we have done. Let us not hold ourselves back because we have not forgiven ourselves. Let God wipe the slate clean and continue to walk in the footsteps of his Son, Jesus Christ. Amen and amen.